Welcome back to the Recruiting Roundup live right here on the YouTube home for BamaOnline.com. Travis Schreier alongside BOL senior staffers, our publisher, of course, Tim Watts, right there in the upper right-hand square. And then we also, of course, have our senior recruiting editor, Andrew Bone. Fellas, coming off a Thanksgiving weekend. How did that go? Did you guys have a good Thanksgiving? I'm assuming you did. And let's talk about maybe a little bit of football game they played, right, on Saturday afternoon in Auburn, Alabama.
Yeah, it was a good week. I think the weather held up, so it's pretty good. You smoke a good cigar on the back porch for me. That's always key. But ate well, moved along, saw some good sports, and it's about what I'd hoped for.
New
Yeah,
addition for the Bone family, right, Andrew, for this
yeah,
Thanksgiving? That had to make
that's
it
right.
exciting.
Oh yeah, we had a new one. Got to experience Thanksgiving. I think my son enjoyed it. My daughter, she was sleeping pretty much the whole time, but except for at night. It's funny how they'll sleep all day, but party all night long. So, it was certainly a fun week. But now Everett's my son is back in daycare, so that's that's good. So we can finally get back to having a little bit of normalcy around here.
And then you got all this, right, with Alabama football recruiting. Hell of a win over the Auburn Tigers. One of the most improbable finishes in a series full of improbable finishes that you'll ever see. And Alabama very much with some momentum continuously, it seems like, on the recruiting trail. And so, guys, when you think about that game in Auburn on Saturday, Tim, give us some of the highlights as far as recruits, prospects that were in attendance that Alabama has some crossover interest in.
I mean, obviously, Auburn was hosting the game, but whenever that game's in Alabama and Auburn's played, you've got crossover from Bama commits and really big in-state games. You see that pretty consistently. You saw the Alabama game, you saw Auburn commitments, Demarcus Riddick, former Perry Thompson, and Perry Thompson, a former Bama commitment, come. So, I think the one thing that's hard for adults to grasp is they are kids and they're going to take visits and they're going to have fun. They might be going to college at Bama, but they can have a good time at Auburn. They might be going to college at Auburn, but they're going to have a good time at Bama. I mean, these are nice colleges, pretty girls, good sports events, and everything else. But obviously, they had a couple that stand out. Ryan Williams, and Andrew can talk about him. He had a good interview with him yesterday. 2025 wide receiver, very elite prospect. Jeremiah Beeman was there, the Parker defensive lineman. But yeah, about the usual suspects that you expect. And Caleb Odom went. The Georgia commitment for Alabama, he was there. So you had some Alabama commitments in attendance, and some guys, guys Auburn are still recruiting.
What about it, Andrew? What stood out to you about the weekend?
Well, the Isaiah Bond catch for one was certainly something that stood out. Former Florida commit Isaiah Bond. Obviously, he had it, and from a former Texas commitment, Jalen Milroe to end the game. So it's definitely it was definitely a weekend where Auburn, they were kind of in a win-win situation as far as recruiting, because they knew that going into it, you play good, you can sell that to recruits. You play bad, you can sell that to recruits because you can get more kids in, tell them that they're going to play right away. But as far as Alabama is concerned, they currently have a top 5 recruiting class. They're trying to finish strong. Can they finish with a top 3 class? And who are kind of some of their remaining targets? And a few of their targets, not necessarily targets, but more so commits, were on the Auburn campus with Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Beeman. And I had a chance to talk to Ryan, and Auburn reporters spoke to him afterwards, after the game as well. And we still feel good about where things stand with Alabama. He says he's 100% locked in with the Tide. Used the word "we" every time he talked about Alabama. And the chance he might even be in Atlanta this weekend for the SEC championship game. But they're still going to continue to pounce hard on him all the way until he signs that letter of intent. Now, we're still kind of waiting to hear if he's going to announce possible reclassification in the 2024 class. So if that happens, I think it will happen relatively soon. But still kind of waiting to see what happens there. And then when Jeremiah Beeman we've known that Auburn's been in the race there for a while. He took an official visit back in September. Now, this was his first trip back to Auburn since that late September official visit. And, he's visited Colorado, which he was going to take an official visit back to Colorado. Doesn't look like that's going to happen anymore. But Auburn, still very much, trying to flip him, and they'll be working on him all the way until the end. But really, those were the two main guys. There were some guys in the 2025 class. Zion Grady, who's an Alabama commitment, was over there. I don't think there's really much to worry about with him. Obviously some other big kids like Micah DeBose out of Viger High School, and Naheem Alford, the five-star corner out of Parker in Birmingham, who's also Jeremiah teammate.
One of the things I'd like to point out, you want to be a coach, you want the life of a college coach. How do you go from that game, emotionally draining, losing that? I'm talking about the Auburn staff, and this would have been for anybody, to go in and try to be chipper and sell your program when you're like heartbroken. I mean, that's my thought was, I've seen it on the other side. You've seen Alabama lose it. You got to go into that locker room. You got to go on the field, and you got to be chipper around a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds. That's a tough gig when you think, it's like going to your friend's bachelor party when your girlfriend's wife just left you. That's a hard sell though. So I was thinking of all the emotions that went into that game and, everything that came out of it. But, obviously probably a good environment for the Auburn visitors.
I guess, Tim, we've even seen the other side of it too. You got to still go recruit if you win the game. A national championship game. We've seen Alabama win those, and we heard about Nick Saban. Before he could get out of the locker room, he's talking about, I got to visit this kid. I got to get on the phone, or he's on the phone, it seems like, with these prospects, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, they're going to hit the ground running next week. As soon as the SEC championship game ends, win or loss. I think next Sunday night they'll have their team banquet, and then, Monday morning they'll be out on the road recruiting, trying to finish this class.
Yeah, there's so much left. I think when you look at it, like the recruiting's really just beginning, because now a lot of team seasons, like you said, will be over Sunday for the most part, as far as the regular season. A lot of teams are already putting their game plan together. But, yeah, when they hit that road, Sunday's that day you start hearing from coaches that you haven't heard from in 3 or 4 months. It's funny you mentioned Colorado. On a side note, that's how long the season's been. At one point, Colorado was ranked, and everybody was going there.
College football playoff.
I mean, it was, that was we were talking about this on the round table, the Bama Online message board, and we were talking about how quick it just kind of went by. But, man, there's been some roller coasters up and down with that. And, of course, we're expecting a few of those roller coasters with recruiting.
It seems like we talk about Alabama and Georgia almost synonymously in terms of how their programs are run. Obviously, the ties between Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, but then it extends especially to the recruiting trail. And so my question for you guys today, among several, is what is the crossover like in this class for 2024 where Alabama and Georgia are concerned? And then we'll get into a little bit later some Uncle Tim time, maybe with some past stories involving these two on the recruiting trail.
I don't know if everything just happened so early. It doesn't seem like as many battles. Georgia beat Alabama for Nate Frazier, for instance. He was a guy that Alabama liked. Number 1 running back in the country, I believe, is his ranking, from California. You look at other guys like Caleb Odom, who's from the state of Georgia, Amari Jefferson. Georgia was involved in there, but not a lot of heated battles. Last year we saw Caleb and Justice, for instance, and those kind of stood out. So we saw more battles last year for high-profile guys. But, again, I think part of this just goes to the fact it's another down year. A lot of coaches and a lot of schools went ahead and filled a majority of their class in the summer. So just not as many as, probably we're used to. Better last year and probably more coming next year.
What about that, Andrew? 2025, is it shaping up for more of that, you think?
Yeah, I think so. And, you look at, even some 2024 guys, Peyton Woodyard flipped his commitment from Georgia, Alabama, which I think, you're a Georgia fan, 6 months ago, you feel pretty confident in that, commitment with Peyton Woodyard. And then, of course, In the 2025 cycle, Micah DeBose, Georgia commitment, still a top target for Alabama, was in Auburn this past weekend. So definitely a guy that both those schools are hoping to flip. Justice Terry, who's a D-line commitment for Georgia, has been to Tuscaloosa twice this season. We're going to see a lot of crossover over the course of the next couple of years. Several years. I mean, we've seen that really ever since Kirby Smart arrived at Georgia. They're certainly going after similar recruits. A lot of them are highly ranked, but they also, each school finds gems. Guys that the other schools aren't recruiting. Maybe even in their home states. So it's going to be interesting, kind of see how things play out with both programs over the upcoming years, because both consistently in that top 3 in recruiting. We'll see if that's going to stay the same, because we continue to see more schools use NIL to their advantage, and be able to get into that top 10, top 5 in the team rankings.
Question for both you guys: if you're Nick Saban, the prospect still out there for this 2024 class that you would go see first when you can hit the road here coming up, who is that guy in your opinion for Alabama?
You talking commitment or non-commitment?
Either way.
Man, that's a tough one. For me personally, as a non-committed guy, I think Keywan Lacey's a guy that's really a priority for them. You don't have a running back. It's not a great running back class, as we touched on several times. And I'm telling you, this guy's got a little bit something special in him. Now, you're looking to compare him to some of the other running backs. He's probably got as high as upside as anybody in his class. Really had a good senior year. I do think that there's like some committed guys they'll be going to see, as far as, you want to make sure, you've got Caleb Odom, who's taking some visits, and guys like that. But if you're talking non-committed, for me, it's the running back.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll have to go to the O-line and D-line. I mean, I think Jordan Seaton remains a top priority there for Alabama. Yep. Certainly somebody that they would love to get. You potentially pair him up with, on the bookends with Caden Proctor here in the future. I mean, that would be pretty special group there. But obviously it's going to be tough. Going to be a long stretch. It's going to be a long process down the home stretch for Seaton, just because there's going to be a lot of twists and turns with his recruitment all the way until the end. And then I'll go to the defensive line real quick. Elias Williams. I think Alabama really likes him a lot. 6'4", 275-pound defensive lineman that can run. He plays on the outside edge, but certainly a guy that Alabama's been pushing for really ever since they extended the offer back in late August. Committed to Mizzou, but it's taken visits to Alabama and Tennessee in the last month. So I think Alabama, I think they're going to have a really good chance to potentially flip him. And he's certainly a guy, there's a kid up in Canada, our favorite guy on the message board, Stephen Bamua.
Steve.
I like where Alabama sits with him. So I'm not saying he's the first guy to go see, but he's certainly up there. So I would go see Elias Williams.
Let me jump in. If you're a Christmas kind of guy, I think that going to see him is one of your first. I've discussed this before. Quebec City's like the Christmas, like it's one of the top Christmas destinations in the world. I think you go up there, you take some pictures, you take your family, you see Stevie.
Oh, and it's St. Nick too, going up there.
Absolutely. So. I mean, what else could you be? I mean, just from a have fun standpoint, Germany wouldn't be a bad trip around Christmas time. They've got some of the world's oldest markets. But yeah, I agree with Andrew. Jordan Seaton's a good call. That's obviously going to be, I think the NIL is going to play a factor there. Still be to be determined how that one shapes out. But he'd be you almost kind of wonder with the Seaton and Proctor, that'd be one of the best offensive line back-to-back hits that I can recall in college football.
And oh, by the way, the transfer portal window officially opens 1 week from today. And with it comes NIL and coaching changes and all these things. You almost feel like you need a capologist now, like the salary cap and in the NFL for college football. So when we look at it from that perspective and mix in transfer portal, early enrollees for bowl practice, that are going to be on hand for Alabama. Boy, the roster management, it just underscores once again how this truly is a 365 day out of the year situation.
Yeah, you basically need a general manager like the NFL now. You got to manage, and again, we talk about the NIL being, getting recruits, which is, I think, most of what people follow recruits, but really the NIL, you got to take care of the guys on campus. You got to make sure they're getting their cut, the guys that are starters and all that kind of stuff. So you got to manage all of that. It's not as simple. Like you hear, the boogeyman. NIL is the boogeyman. And you're saying, hey, War Chest, James Smith, they're giving them $2.8 million. That's not very realistic. Still got to have 22 stars, got to have bench players and everything else. It's still a lot of factors that go into that. You saw that with Jimbo Fisher. I mean, Mike Elko's now a head coach, and his top job is trying to keep his guys on campus, right?
Yeah.
He's not even really going out recruiting. He's got to meet with every, Evan Stewart set out the LSU game. We've heard some people mention him with Alabama. So, yeah, it's an entire different world right now. And for me, being a get off the lawn, my guy, I love it. I love it. I like it. It's a challenge. It's certainly frustrating, but I love the flow and changes of everything happening.
Andrew, if you look at it from the portal perspective, is there an area to this team? And that's before you take into account, like Tim talked about, you're trying to keep guys, so you don't really know from a retention standpoint who you might be losing. But just on the surface, looking at Alabama, if there was a spot or two on this team moving forward, what would your expectation be in terms of emphasis where the portal is concerned?
I think you got to look at who's potentially going to leave, who's coming back. I think Alabama probably knows some of the guys that are certainly going to leave as far as hitting the portal and kind of where their numbers are going to be. But you also got to figure out who are you going to be able to bring into this class. I think last year, Caden Proctor, when Alabama was able to flip Caden Proctor from Iowa during that early signing period, I think they had it in their head that they were going to go after an offensive tackle. When they got Caden Proctor, that kind of changed things, decided not to go after an offensive tackle. Now, they're able to flip somebody late in the process or get a big name guy. They may not go after somebody in that position. But as far as right now, I think you're looking at offensive line. I think offensive line is an area that they are, going to have some interest in someone. I think defensive back wise, especially at corner, you potentially lose Kool-Aid. Derrion Arnold may end up going into the draft. We don't know that yet, but that's a possibility. You lose your two outside corners, that might entice you to start looking a little bit harder, at the cornerback position. Now, we've seen all this talk about Evan Stewart on the message boards, and Alabama has not contacted Evan Stewart. He's not in the transfer portal, so I don't know why everybody's talking about that just yet. I think that that's an area that Alabama doesn't necessarily have to go after a wide receiver in the transfer portal because you got a lot of guys that are coming back next year that are really talented. You got some guys that are going to be coming in. So it'll be interesting to see who enters the portal because we're going to see probably more names than ever before get into the portal this year. There's going to be a lot of high price tags on a lot of these kids as well. So just because our kid is really good and you think he can help your program, it may not be a good fit.
And there's another fact. There's another factor here too. When you're expecting when you're on campus to have them recruit freshmen, but if you're on scholarship at a university and they're looking in the portal, that's a little bit of a different ball game. I mean, you got to manage. You don't want to be bringing one in and losing one, swapping them out. The one
you
thing
better be sure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're thinking if we do this, we could lose two guys.
Yeah, because I don't know if a guy on campus is necessarily worried about a high school senior. You know what I mean? Right. I don't know. We used to think that most of them do not keep up with the recruiting once they get to college. They kind of move on. But when you start bringing in another name, another quarterback or another, linebacker or whatever, they're aware of it. So that could cause somebody else. I mean, there's a lot of egos involved in sports, right? I mean, there's a lot of, and I'm talking parents. I mean, these parents – they didn't give their kids up when they went to college. They were involved before, they're involved now. But there's so many things to balance. But I agree when you look at with Andrew, you look at the DBs a possible place, but they're bringing in a big class. Also they know what's behind these guys. That's the one thing that to remember. I know that a lot of the fans don't think the coaches watch their players sometimes, but they know what's behind them. They usually know what they've got on campus. So they're going to identify those needs and who's going to go pro, Who's going to hit the, Cohen last year is a prime example. A guy that, got some starts and then hit the portal. So it'll be
there's
an
always going
interesting
to be
run here.
maybe a surprise or two. And as
Sure.
Andrew alluded to, it sounds like we're about to enter the next step of the transfer portal era. We thought the last couple of years were interesting. It could get even more so coming up. So getting back to this Alabama-Georgia matchup that we have coming up, some previous Bama UGA battles on the trail that maybe stand out to you guys. I know I've got a few in mind, but Tim, get us started, and then Andrew, give us some more too.
I really can never get over the Kirby from Bama to Georgia. Pruitt comes to Alabama. Smitty comes with him. Fromm goes with Kirby to Georgia. Tua ends up at Alabama, and then the second and 26. Like, there's an entire book written about that scenario, right? I mean, it's so, and it all made sense. Kirby recruited Jake Fromm. They had a good relationship. Fromm was a Georgia boy. Previous Georgia staff kind of messed up there. Let Kirby, is an excellent recruiter. He got his foot in the door. That was all it took. And, when he flipped, it made sense. Again, that's a Georgia kid going there. But then the dominoes that fell after with Pruitt, Pruitt being connected to Devonta Smith, Sam Petito being a big part of that, him and Pruitt being close, bringing him here. And then again, to have the Tua Smitty, which I thought was one of the most outrageous plays I'd ever seen until Saturday, have that play into the national championship. Of course, against Georgia is kind of just, I'm never going to be able to top that connection, I don't think.
I mean, you look back at a lot of, Georgia, Alabama recruiting battles that we've seen, a lot of running backs that have gone on to star in the pros. Derrick Henry was a former Georgia commitment. Now, he reopened his recruitment before committing to Alabama, but was committed to Georgia I'll never forget. I interviewed Derrick Henry once, and he was committed to Georgia at the time, and he had just come off of a visit to Alabama, and he said, I feel like I fit in better at Alabama than I do at Georgia. And he stayed committed to Georgia for another 2 months after that. So that was always wild. Nick Chubb was another kid that, Alabama, Georgia, tight recruiting battle. Georgia kid ends up staying home. We remember back Isaiah Crowell, who was one of the top running backs in the country at the time, announced for Georgia with some, couple Bulldogs. Now, current Alabama
live Bulldogs. Yeah.
I remember
that.
I haven't seen any live animals here lately in these press conferences, but current Alabama player like Tyler Booker, that was a kid that went into the summer. A couple of summers ago, it was supposed to be a recruiting battle between Georgia and Florida, with Georgia having the edge heading into the summer, and then he took that official visit to Alabama, and things just completely changed thanks to J.C. Latham, who helped recruit him. And then obviously last year, going into the state of Georgia, getting Justice Haynes and Caleb Downs. Caleb having an unbelievable freshman season, freshman All-American type season for the Tide. And then Justice Haynes, who had a little bit of action, not a ton, but I think we might see him a little bit more in the coming weeks. So going into Georgia, getting a Georgia legacy, obviously a big win there. So, a lot of great Alabama, Georgia recruiting battles. We could probably talk about that for another hour. But
Clay Webb's one. There's one from the past. That was
out in Anniston. Yeah.
It's funny. You look back at the heated battles and the animosity between, fan bases, and then a guy just never really had a big impact at either school. But you remember how heated that was. Now, I don't think anybody will admit how heated it was in hindsight. But me and Andrew were in there. You saw it on the message board. That was a very heated exchange at that time. But I agree. The thing that's kind of interesting about Justice and Caleb was like Georgia was in it, but you always felt like they weren't second. Georgia felt they were in it, but then the guys would come out and say, well, Ohio State was second, right? Caleb took that late visit and all that stuff, but very interesting. One thing about Kirby Smart, he's smart. Obviously, he's smart, and Alabama's smart. I think the smart recruiting staffs know when to punt. You know what I mean? They know when to punt. and they know when to stand in the pocket and fight, because you don't want to waste a lot of effort. Nakobe Dean's a good example. That was a good win for Georgia. That was a very important key. Nobody understands recruiting more than Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, right? So they knew their key guys getting there. But I think the smart teams know they don't want to go to the wire and not know where he's committing, because that's a very uncomfortable. There ain't nothing like a college coach going, "Hey, have you heard anything?" 3 hours before a commitment. You're like, "Oh, buddy."
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
guys
Oh,
talk
buddy.
about the Heisman connection and all this. Derrick Henry, Georgia, Alabama, wins the Heisman Trophy. Devontae Smith, Georgia, Alabama, wins the
Yeah.
Heisman Trophy at Alabama. Even in 2020, Carson Beck, now the quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs, was at one time committed to Alabama, ends up at Georgia, but Alabama gets Bryce Young in
Yep.
2020, wins
Yeah.
the Heisman Trophy. So those worked out pretty well for the Crimson Tide, I guess.
Yeah, that's quite the domino. When you look at that jumbled mess of quarterbacks, I mean, you could write a book on the connections with Alabama and quarterbacks. You had Talia on campus, were coming. You had Drake May committed. You had Carson Beck committed. You end up with Bryce Young. Next year, you flip Jalen Milroe. Alabama went from an extremely boring quarterback school, right?
Yeah.
Recruit Tebow, don't
Remember
get him,
the
get
no
back from
first
it. You know what I
round
mean?
thing? The no first
Yeah.
round quarterbacks was a real
Yes, and it
thing.
was just kind of boring. You got a guy, he was nothing sexy. There was no major drama around him. McElroy's probably the most drama. And then all of a sudden you get quarterback dominoes that affect the entire nation.
Yep.
So very interesting how that quarterback position has evolved for Alabama, from boring to, and again, Julian Sagan's the number one quarterback in the class. And going back to a Georgia kid, Alabama got Dylan Lonergan from Georgia last year, who's a heck of a football player.
Yeah, and you talk
So,
about the early enrollee with Julian Sayin. Andrew, what are sort of the expectations for that group? Do we have more intel on what it's going to look like exactly? Because that's very much on the horizon too.
Yeah, it is. And the biggest thing about the early enrollees is most of these guys are going to be there for bowl practice, so they're going to get a little bit of a taste of what it's like at Alabama, just like we saw with a lot of the guys last year, like Caleb Downs and Justice Haynes coming in and practicing with the team. I think as of right now, there's 16 guys that are currently early enrollees. Now that includes Julian Singh. That includes the 3 offensive line.
16 of 19. 16 of 19. That's a very high percentage.
We're going to just stop calling them early enrollees, right? I mean,
well, the thing about it for me, we've discussed, to me, the importance is having those months to get acclimated, right? You get used to where's the dorm, where is the mess hall. I don't know why I'm talking in Army terms, but
training table.
Where's the food? Where's the bowling alley? Where's the movie theater?
Chow hall.
Yeah. I turned into a few good men here. So you get that. You just get used to your surroundings. You get used to going to class. Because can you imagine going into August? You're practicing with Alabama. Everything's intense. You're trying to figure out. You're a freshman. You got all the college girls. You're trying to figure out your whole thing in 1 month in August. That's why I think that it's huge. It's huge that they get there and just get used and get settled in and get the homesickness out of the way, because if they survive that to the season, once the season gets here, they're going to be fine. So huge for several reasons. Also, it's huge so we can see them in the A-Day game.
Exactly.
One of them can overperform, and then we can spend a year answering why they didn't start.
We can go ahead and make definitive, conclusive.
Let's get one of those guys. Yes, somebody who's a star.
We can
and
speak in absolute
guys who got a little banged up during the season. No major injuries, but going ahead and getting there on campus, being with the UA medical and training staff, that's obviously going to be really beneficial to those guys. But yeah, I mean, getting this many guys on campus, and that number is going to grow. Alabama gets more commitments; they get transfer kids. We're going to see that number, probably get into the 20s, kind of like what we saw last year. I think there was 27 players who were on campus in January last year. So we'll see that number grow a little bit, maybe not too much, but it should grow into the 20s.
And it happens fast. I mean, remember Jermaine Burton beat Alabama in the national championship game, was on campus the next week later. I think. You know what I mean? That happened so fast. We're like, wait a minute, did we just play you? So, it's going to happen really fast. It's going to be a lot of movement. It's going to be a pain in the butt. They've dragged the friggin' signing window up to December 20th to 22nd, which is also kind of unfair to, every college coach, everybody doing bowl practice and all that. But some fun times coming.
So, guys, is it the usual suspects when it comes to the schools that Alabama is going to really battle the most here down the stretch of this 2024 cycle? Or is there a wild card involved here with a prospect that Alabama really, really would like to land?
I think Florida's one I'm really watching, right? Florida's going after Jordan Seaton, Jameer Grimsley. They hosted him this week. They're involved with Zay Mincy, the defensive back from Florida. And Billy needs some wins, right? He needs some wins. He had a tough season. He's caught a lot of criticism along the way. Recruiting, cures a lot of L's in this business. So they need some wins on the recruiting trail. Now they've lost some guys. They've had some decommitments. They've had some flips because of the season they had. So that's the one I'm kind of watching the closest to see who needs it the most coming down the stretch.
You have your usual suspects. You have Auburn, as Tim mentioned, Florida, Tennessee. Certainly another school. Oregon's a program that recruiting a couple similar guys. One wild card I'll throw out there is Kansas State. Alabama's bowl opponent.
Nice.
Yeah, Jay-Sean Ross out of Kansas City, outside linebacker, 6'4", 220 pounds. Took an official visit with Tide earlier this month. Looking like he's probably going to come back for an unofficial before signing day. I don't think that's set yet, but could end up coming down between Alabama and Kansas State for Jay-Sean Ross. And that's a kid that they really like a lot, has moved up the recruiting board, and they still don't have an outside linebacker commit. So if they can get him back on campus one more time, I think they're going to have a good chance. Now, Kansas State's, they've had him on their campus several times. Certainly a top target for them, but could come down to an Alabama-Kansas State battle for one of the top outside linebackers in the country.
Name the last great Alabama-Kansas State recruiting battle. I'll hang up and listen.
Didn't Alabama get Edric Hill from out there last year, maybe?
I don't
that
remember.
Area?
Yeah, he's from Kansas City. I don't think Kansas State was.
I just don't remember their name. That's crap. I love it. That's crazy. Also, before we go, we do want to, Travis, I'm sorry, we got far into it, didn't discuss the basketball guy, Derrion Reid.
Yeah, I was going to get to him.
Okay.
He's coming up.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm trying to help here too.
I got you.
Travis, take the wheel.
What about, look, before we get to Derrion Reid, the 5-star from Prolific Prep, let's get a final prediction ranking for you guys for this 2024 class. I'm going to go ahead and put you on the clock. What are your thoughts right now as it sits? Obviously, with a few important spots to fill, what are you kind of projecting for this class? Top 3, top 5, top?
I think top 3. I don't think they're going to get in one of the top 2 slots. And that may be just me being a little pessimistic, but I'm looking at Georgia and Texas are going to have pretty good classes. They got a lot of momentum this year. Alabama's going to bring in a smaller group overall, but I think that Georgia's going to be tough to beat. Ohio State's always going to be up there. Texas, I still feel like Texas is going to close strong is what I should have said. Florida's up there. I'll go 3 to 5 range. I feel comfortable with that. 3 possibly being the cap for me.
Yeah, I think a lot kind of just depends on what happens over the course of the next, month and a half, especially with the All-Star games. Who moves up, who moves down in the final rankings. You have your potential flips. You have your potential coaching changes that could affect some kids as far as what if your kid commits to an offensive coordinator, that offensive coordinator becomes the head coach somewhere. Does that affect that kid? So a lot can change over the course of the next month and a half. I would say top 3. That's where I'm kind of at right now. I know going out on a limb, but I mean, it's just hard to imagine Alabama not being able to close strong in this class. They're currently sitting at number 5. Got to hang on to your commitments, and you just never know what else might happen. But I'm going to say top 3 as of right now, and I'll go with 3.
A lot of folks. Go ahead, Tim.
One more thing on this class is, like, I always judge, a lot of people kind of pointed out the bottom of the class is weaker. When the bottom guys in your class, Andrew had a great point. Travis, you know how much I love Robbie Oots. coming out of high school. I mean, he's basically a football glue guy. He does blocks. He gets the ball out. He's going to give you 100%. He's going to seal the edge. He's going to have a few big passes. But when you're getting a guy like Jay Lindsey, who's one of your bottom three, that's humongous. Drake Patrick, who we don't talk about nearly enough, had probably, from a return standpoint, the best senior year I've ever even heard of. I don't know if Adrian has the stats handy. He had a ton of touchdown returns, had a big year, was definitely a guy that is a fast riser. And when you look at a guy like Joseph Ionata, if you watch his film, you see that interior guard. He's ranked in that area where you see guys have that grow and emerge. He's got that nasty streak. So when you look at the bottom, when your weakest links are guys like that, you've had a good class. A lot of times having the class comes down to numbers. How many can you sign? How many do you sign? And all that stuff. And I think those numbers are extremely hard to manage now because of the portal. You know, at the end of the day, you can get, you know, a Tyler Steen versus a high school, high school senior. What do you do there? I mean, you're talking in the same range. So, but I think Alabama's class has been good, and the 25 class has a chance to be much better.
They're not reaching. They don't have to reach.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Yeah.
They're, if they don't see an offensive lineman that they like or they feel like they can't develop, they'll just go get one from the transfer portal.
Cherry pick the portal.
And they knew, based last year's class, we were talking to people that knew. They knew, for instance, that the running back class was down. That's why they were all in on Justice Haynes and Richard Young, both who would be considered right at the top of this list when it comes to recruiting running back rankings. So they knew this was coming. I mean, other college staffs did too. I'm not just saying Alabama, but they knew this class was going to be smaller than the past one. And that's kind of why they filled up the bucket last year, and did well in the portal.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap up this edition of the recruiting roundup with a couple of questions related to kind of Northern California. I got to know, Brock Bowers, was Alabama involved in that back during his recruitment?
Somewhat. They extended him an offer. I don't think he ever ended up visiting Alabama. Probably the first kid that I can remember from wine country. But
Napa.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable. I don't know if a lot of people didn't know much about him, but I think Charles Power, I think he was like maybe one of the first ones that ranked him a 5-star recruit on any service. So that, props to Charles for knocking that one out of the park.
Yeah, I feel like Georgia attacked him really early on too. Like before you saw a lot of that rise, I think Georgia was all in on him. I think they, kudos to them. I mean, good recruiting staff. They went all in knowing what they need and what they wanted to do with that tight end position.
Yeah, that was an area too. Jonah Williams, Najee Harris from up that way. So that got me to thinking a little bit about the Brock Bowers situation. And sticking with that Napa area, that's also home to Prolific Prep, which is home to Derrion Reid, the 5-star prospect for the 2024 basketball cycle. Aiden Sherrill, his teammate there at Prolific Prep, already in the boat for the Alabama Crimson Tide. What are we hearing, guys? Tim, what do you think about Alabama's chances with Derrion Reid?
Our own Joseph Hastings went by and saw him play Friday night. Said it was limited on the highlights they could put out for some reason on social, but I got a good interview with him. Derrion, very heated recruiting battle with Alabama and Georgia, very heated. In fact, at one point, he had his date set to commit, and I have been told by enough people to 100% believe it that if he had committed on that date, it was going to be Georgia, but he postponed it. Has said he's going to make his announcement in Christmas. I like where Bama stands. I think the Bama staff, more importantly, the Bama staff is really comfortable where they stand with him. And again, you're talking, the 5-star plus. He's a 5-star across the board, with everybody. So that means a little bit more. And then you look at the class itself. I mean, Alabama's ranked 8th in the country. Have, Aiden Sherrill, a big-time center, a guy that fits that system really well. Nas Cunningham is a commitment who was number 1 in the nation at one point this summer and fell off from that point. But, they could get Reid, move up into that top. I don't know. We used to be able to figure it out. But, I mean, getting Reid's going to move him up in that top 3 range, I'm sure. Still need to get a guard, I think, from some point. But, man, they have a lot of success in that portal with the guard position. You're seeing that this year with, some of the guys that have done well. Some of the guys, Strada. Heck, that kid can really play. So they'll go in, try to get those bigs. A lot harder to find those guys in the portal unless they're really, really expensive.
Andrew, as we get out of here, what do we need to know for the next few days at BamaOnline.com? What do we need to be looking for?
Well, I'll tell you, over the next 24 hours, what people need to look for is our cyber sale. Take advantage of that 50% off deal. It's 1 year of access to Bama Online, so go check it out. We're gonna have a ton of content coming out this week. Mainly centered on the Alabama-Georgia game. We'll be talking, current recruiting battles, past recruiting battles. We're talking about guys on the team. We talked about some of those guys today, but we'll dive a little bit more into that. Really over the course of the next week, we're going to be trying to find out, who's certainly going to be coming in for official visits. Remember, official visits start on December the 8th. So there's going to be a lot of kids that are going to be coming into town over these next couple of weeks. Not just officials, but unofficials as well. In-home visits for coaches start next Monday. So be tuned to Bama Online, more specifically the BOL Roundtable. So get on that message board every single day. Stay in the know on what's exactly happening.
Well, the good thing is Tim's a very calm individual. So, this will just be all of this craziness. Tim will just smooth it right out, right, Tim? We'll just sail right through
I'm
this
a
next
lot
month.
calmer, except for this 4 to 6 week window. This window, it gets hectic. Now, hey, I'm old. They have messed up my whole life. I had peace on earth everywhere
and goodwill
until this coming Sunday, right? That's when all heck broke loose. Well, now they broke loose early. I mean, I got guys in the portal. I got coaches being fired. We got guys. Rex Johnson is going into the portal for his, the second time he's been in there, the Aggies quarterback. We got the rumors,
coaching changes too.
But man, I will say the recruiting coverage, our guys, Andrew, Joseph, the team coverage, you, Charlie, Clint, Jimmy, it's the best staff I've ever been part of. I just enjoy working with all these guys and not having a long-term relationship. You never know. Me and Andrew didn't grow up together. Me being the big brother, top bunk kind of guy, but absolutely. This week alone, you got Ryan Williams interview. Andrew, great job. Jeremiah Beeman, another great, interview from Joseph, and Derrion Reid. That's just happened since Sunday, just yesterday. So a lot happening. We'd love to have you.
Come hang out with us at BamaOnline.com. Certainly the roundtable or premium message board. That's where you want to be with us. Guys, thanks as always. Enjoyed it.
All right. Fantastic. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tim.
For Tim Watts, Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us for the recruiting roundup right here on the YouTube and podcast homes for BamaOnline.com. Until next time, so long, everybody.